Morning. My name is Monique Elliott from Schneider Electric, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third day of the IEA Conference on Energy Efficiency. This morning, Jean-Pascal Tricoire, Chairman of Schneider Electric, will begin our program with opening remarks, reflecting on the private and public exchanges from the last day. Following Jean-Pascal's remarks, we will welcome to the stage Vijay Vatheswaran, Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor from The Economist, to moderate a panel discussion on sustainability and energy, the essential partnership for net zero. Joining us for the discussion will be Keisuke Sadamori, Energy Markets and Security Director for the IEA, Christelle Eidemann, CEO of Orange, and Peter Herrick, CEO of Schneider Electric. We hope you enjoy this morning's plenary session, and with that, I turn the floor over to Jean-Pascal.
Good morning, all. This is the third day of the conference, and I hope you are all in good shape. We are live streaming on the IEA site. So what we are doing here is shared on a much larger scale outside of this room. Look, I went through the whole day yesterday, and I like every day to kind of keep a memory of something, a line that has been the major thread of the day. And if I summarize what I heard yesterday, I would say 2 points. I think everybody agrees that energy efficiency is the priority, and that we have technologies and the capabilities to push it to a new scale. And at the same time, it was said several times on stage, it's not a question of choice. We have to do energy efficiency plus renewable. It's not an or, it's an and of many actions that go together. So yesterday, while the panels were happening in this room, there were a certain number of you, and many of you, and I want to thank you all for participating, who were taking part in workshops. And the main topic of the workshop was, how can we unleash to a new scale, on a new speed, energy efficiency everywhere we operate? And there was one workshop about industry, and one workshop about buildings. And I have to say, and again, many thanks for those who participated. It was very engaged, very active, and very pragmatic. Government representatives, company leaders, all together on formulating propositions. So yesterday I sort of hinted at the end of the last panel what were the conclusions. We worked during the night on it, and we've come up with the 10 for 10X. So 10 priorities, and it's not me speaking, that's you speaking, and all the people who participated. So let's go one by one. The first one that was really coming from everywhere, and I have to also start by saying that somewhere the conclusions or the priorities were pretty similar regarding industry on the building space, which means that there are things which are recurrent or transversal to all the sectors. First point was really the need to measure and diagnose. When we go into energy efficiency, very often today the approaches are on the engagement of means, the things which are put in place. It's like if you would say we want to improve a car, but there is no speed meter. We say, okay, we improve the engine, we improve the tires, but we don't look at the efficiency of the car per mile. And it seems quite surprising, but today we have that in the car for a long time. I think most of us know the efficiency per mileage of our car. We don't have that for our home on our building. While we can do it very easily and for very cheap, in a very cheap manner. So digitize consumption, connect, report on apps so that people can get educated and understand what they do, and go from engagement of levers to outcome-based incentives, based on the result you get and not what you do to improve. Second point, which was obvious everywhere, I want to do but I don't know. So awareness and knowledge on here, it's pretty simple. It's about sharing. Sharing practical examples. There was a good example in Ireland of the one-stop shop where people can go for their home and get a very, I would say, objective description of what can be done. On what has been done by the web, for instance, the lighthouse examples in manufacturing, where people somewhere compete to be recognized as the most net zero building or net zero factory. Then a very recurrent subject, not to be underestimated, is skills. When we speak about retrofitting, we are addressing all buildings, we are addressing all plants, and while we speak about new construction, we are addressing only a fraction, a very tiny fraction of what is existing. So the scale of resources to be mobilized is completely different. And then the nature of skills is very different. An electrician has to become a little bit thermicians when they go into energy efficiency. Plumbers have to integrate electricity when they go into heat pumps. So there is kind of a journey across skills which has to be organized. The next point is design and decide on total cost of ownership. We always speak about sustainability, and sustainability is going beyond the moment and thinking long term. And today, most of the designs are done on the cost of construction. They are not done on the total cost of any installation. And take buildings or plants, the time of construction is probably 20% of the total cost that will be generated. So it's important to optimize on the full, and it's particularly important for the decision made at the time of the choice of the project. Financing gap, what appears really well understood is that investment in energy efficiency have a very short payback, which is great, on a very good payback, and it's a recurrent payback. We all do a lot of investments, right? But many investments bring costs as a byproduct of the investment. Efficiency is investing to take out costs. That's quite unique, right? It's like quitting smoking. It's not only good for your health, but it's good also for your wallet and forever. So that's, but to make that jump, which is probably 1.5 to 3 years, many people or many companies need to be helped. And that financing is very special, and it's a small financing that needs to be really, I would say, optimized for that kind of thing. Next point, which was obvious, companies, I should say, but on governments as role models. So companies have taken pretty stringent objectives in terms of carbon neutrality. Governments own tons of buildings and infrastructures, and they should be the flagship and the role model of energy efficiency. Then regulations were cited. There was a vast consensus that the most efficient are incentive and not coercive, carrot more than the stick. But when something has to be coercive, then there has to be an horizon so that people have the time to adapt and the time to review their parameters and to plan for that transition. A point that was really mentioned in the industry part of the workshops was a grid. When you want to acquire green electricity, some people mention 7 years to wait for a line to get access to that kind of power, and that's not at a time when we have the urgency to fight climate change. Those are timelines which are not acceptable. Then ninth point was to say, when we speak about energy transition, there is a natural tendency to revert to big ideas at a long-term horizon. I think there were plenty of people on stage yesterday saying, we've got technologies which are very efficient, which are actually very cheap, but guess what? They are not even deployed at scale. And when we are saying at scale, when people say only 2% of the homes have a thermostat, that is not scale at all, and that is really not serious. So identify the big stage. Remember Kim Fausing from Danfoss saying, well, 65% of buildings are residential, 60% of emissions are due to heating. Well, let's tackle it, right? Let's start with that before going to some exotic ideas with some technologies that will be developed in 10 years' time. So identify the biggest tech items and deploy what we have. Do with what we have, to be pragmatic. And finally, and that's not for retrofit, but for the huge construction which is coming in new economies, and especially in Africa, in India, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, let's try to build the new net zero. And in developed countries, in this case, stop nonsense sort of orientations. I try not to aim immediately at net zero from scratch, especially in developed countries. So those are the 10 for 10x, and they are not coming from me, they are coming from you. I tried to report that work, that huge work against. Many thanks for your participation, for your engagement, and for the very open dialogue yesterday. Today, there are going to be more workshops with the objective to choose, with the objective to be even more pragmatic and to be coming up to governments with things which are executable or implementable. So looking forward to keep the good work together. I wish you a very good day, and I would like now to invite the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pascal, for that warm welcome and that introduction, as I invite my panel to join me. It's a great delight and honor to be here today with such a distinguished group to talk about the future of energy, which is the master resource after all, and the role that energy efficiency can play within it. We've all been reminded of the importance of energy in the last couple of years as we've experienced what Fatih Birol, head of the IEA, called the first truly global energy shock. And it comes this year on the 50th anniversary, of course, of the original oil shock, which we mark and reflect on lessons that we should learn. And one of those lessons really should be, even if it is not fully absorbed, the role of energy efficiency, which has been called the first fuel. So as we think about how to advance the role of energy efficiency more effectively, what's the role of partnerships between government and industry, among industrial organizations, and maybe among governmental cooperation, which we've seen in the last day or two. I want to turn first to you, Kiske. If you can give us the IEA perspective, how do you see the evolution of energy efficiency, where we are now, and maybe give us a reflection from the past. I know as a youth, you had remembered some of the impacts of the early oil shocks in Japan, and how Japan actually did a phenomenal job of embracing energy efficiency, at least for a while. What lesson do you take from that going forward?
Thank you, Vijay. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to the Schneider for hosting this very big, the energy efficiency conference. Yesterday, I was talking with Brian about our memory of the first, the Global Energy Efficiency Conference, and we started from kind of a modest the conference room near the kind of the IEA office in Paris, and it was really hard to imagine at the time that this efficiency conference would grow to this level. I think this is the most significant global energy efficiency conference that we ever had. So thank you very much for all your participation. As Fatih Birol mentioned, we have around 100 countries, participants from 100 countries. And as we speak, more than 30 ministers of the countries around the world are there now in the conference room, maybe below here. And they're discussing how we can accelerate and promote the clean energy transitions and energy efficiency. And we're planning to have their joint declaration statement coming out soon. Now, in terms of the kind of a level of kind of interest in energy efficiency, and I think it is, of course, coming from the need for clean energy transitions and the climate change risks. But also, recently, we can add that energy supply security concerns is adding to that factor. And I think that thanks for raising the experience with the first oil shock in 1970s. I still remember, maybe many of the people around here do not remember anything, or even were not born at the time. But I was maybe a junior high student, and I still remember the chaos in the society of the first oil shock caused. And that forced the governments around the world to go for energy efficiency and also the kind of the alternative energy developments. And so I would recall that for instance, the typical example is the car mileage efficiency, for instance, and the Japanese cars, the energy efficiency improved at a very drastic scale immediately after this, the oil shock. So, so this reminds us that the real crisis, energy security crisis, would force us to take very strong actions in energy conservations and the improving energy efficiency, but also the kind of a faster renewable deployments. But we cannot only rely on the crisis situation. So I think what we need is a very strong, robust, and predictable, stable the policies for the incentives or the standards or the various requirements by the government to force us, the entire society, for the more energy efficient and the cleaner the energy systems.
So one big lesson is when we're in crisis mode, people change behavior, but that's not sustainable in and of itself. We need to have a systematic approach, institutionalized, policy-based. I think we have heard from the IEA in several reports released this week, an assessment of where we are on energy efficiency improvements and where we need to go. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
Are we doing everything that we need to, or is there more to do?
Well, one good news is that things are improving. And we have seen a very slow level of energy efficiency improvements in terms of the the energy intensity of the economy. We were seeing almost like a 1% growth improvements in the past several years. But last year, 2022, we finally saw the improvement rate increase to 2%. So this is good because we are seeing better energy efficiency improvements. But as you point out, this is far less than what is needed. So in our net zero, the pathway, net zero by 2050 pathway, we need the more than 4% of the annual energy efficiency improvements. So that's something
doubling, in effect.
So yeah, doubling
of the rate.
Yeah, from the current level. And also we need to be mindful that this 2% is not something guaranteed.
Right.
Once people become lazy and the government doesn't enforce strong policies, it could be reduced further. So more than 4% is needed toward the 2030s at least to keep us on track to achieve the net zero by 2050 pathway. And also, it's not only about the clean energy transitions or the avoiding the serious climate change risk, but also the energy efficiency is good. It has a kind of multiple benefits. I mean, in terms of energy security, but also it can lead to more high-quality jobs. And also it helps the countries without energy access to get them. I mean, so in that respect, I think that we all need to be aware of the whole, the benefits that the energy efficiency improvement can bring, and we work really hard to achieve it. Thanks.
Well, just one further thought on this before we dig into the experiences of our practitioners. Everything you say sounds so good. As Americans say, it's like motherhood and apple pie. Who can be against it?
Exactly.
Why is it so hard to do?
Well, first of all, we cannot see it. And in the case of solar PV wind, we can see those windmills standing up in the air. And we can see the numbers in terms of the gigawatts generated from this power plants. But we don't see that in the energy efficiency. So that's why in our energy efficiency market reports, we've been trying to come up with ways to show the very tangible benefits from the energy efficiency. So what if the efficiency improvement had not happened? We would have needed this certain amount of, so
extra coal power plants you would have needed, or
exactly, and of course, the best and the safest power plants are those not built. So in that respect, we've been trying to kind of to improve the kind of visibility of the benefits from the energy efficiency improvements. But of course, we have not done enough. So we would like to work even harder on it, and we would really appreciate everybody's input into such efforts. So thank you very much for that.
No, thank you. So we see the scope of the challenge as well as the opportunity that you've laid out for us, that really we have to raise ambition and maybe institutionalize or make things more tangible so that people act on them. Let me turn to you, Christelle, if you don't mind. You're in a sector that is not ostensibly a heavy industry. You're not a power producer or a steel maker. You do something also that's in the ether, communications. You connect people, right? And yet, we all know, when we dig deep into it, the more and more advanced we get with communications, you need energy. We've seen the transformation in the digital sector from the internet itself to streaming to cloud to now, of course, 5G, Internet of Things rolling out. Each is a big energy guzzler. So tell us how you think about digital, and in particular, how you try to ensure that as you expand the services and connectivity that we all enjoy and appreciate and want more of, how do you do it in a way that's responsible and mindful of efficiency?
Sure. So, I mean, if there's one industry indeed that's focused on energy efficiency for quite some time, it's really the digital industry. Because think about it, every year we have to design and upgrade our networks to swallow an increase of traffic of 30% on our mobile networks. So on one side, you have 30% increase on the demand side, and especially last year, if you think about the increase of the price of electricity in Europe, we want to control our cost structure. So I think the industry, whether it's the cloud providers or telecom providers, we've been focusing on energy efficiency for quite some time. We've launched a program a few years back already, which we've called Green IT Networks, that's helping us stabilize our energy consumption in an environment where we deploy more mobile sites, and the energy consumption of our networks is driven by the number of mobile sites. Then optimizing the design of our networks, because thinking about it, why would you have always-on networks? I mean, Wi-Fi networks, mobile networks, when actually at night nobody's really turning on the phone. So we are putting intelligence in our networks so that we can optimize the power emission of our mobile sites. That's a lot of work, but that's something that we've been working. Between 2019 and 22, we saved 25% in terms of energy consumption in Europe on our mobile networks. That's a lot of work. But again, because we're adding more networks, ultimately, that's stabilizing our energy consumption. In Africa, where we operate, the biggest challenge is to move from gensets, fuel, to electricity and renewable electricity. But it's not somehow, if you have a big power plant or a big construction site or manufacturing plant, you know how to do that. But when you have thousands of mobile sites spread in areas where actually there's no electricity grid, the challenge is to indeed deploy solar and battery on our mobile sites, which we've done for 20% of our mobile sites in Africa. We keep on working on it, and we keep working with governments as well to make sure that when there's investment in solar plants, we can co-finance some of them and consume that electricity. In Jordan, for instance, we've done it, and there's 3 solar plants that have been deployed that we're consuming for our needs, because obviously we're lucky enough to be in an industry that consumes electricity, so for us it's really massively moving to renewable energy. In Europe, we want to move to 75% renewable energy by 2025. That's not that easy, because everyone wants to do that. So there's a speed, and it's a race that we're moving at. But again, I think thanks to digital, we're helping our customers as well see their consumption, mobile data consumption, to make sure that we can be efficient, turning off, again, their equipments at night. So we've moved beyond just providing the information to our consumers. We've integrated features where automatically the network will do things, and when people enter their homes, the Wi-Fi box will turn on automatically, because we know that if we only rely on the behavior of people, we're not going to get the maximum impact. So that's a lot of work. The biggest challenge that we have is that if you think about it, telecom networks are highly inefficient, because today in this country, We operate at Orange 2 fixed networks, 4 mobile networks, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, copper, fiber. Copper is 3 times less efficient than fiber. 5G is 10 times more efficient than 4G. So our biggest opportunity for energy efficiency is to decommission copper and decommission 2G and 3G, which we plan to do by 2025 for 3G, 2028 for 2G, or vice versa, copper by 2030. But again, we have to do that while meeting the demand that's increasing by 30% every year. So that's really a challenge that we can't achieve unless we work hard with our equipment vendors, with all, I would say, technology providers, because it requires collaboration across industries. So we're working obviously with partners like Schneider Electric, Cisco, Nokia, and the device manufacturer as well, because we haven't talked about CO2 emission, but the largest CO2 emission for telecom operators is coming from the manufacturing of those devices. So extending the lifetime of those devices, repairing, providing services is also a big area of investment for us.
So you've laid out actually even a business argument why you're taking energy efficiency seriously. And you hinted at the carbon question. Do you find things like a net zero commitment, which in a sense is a societal obligation more than an immediate quarterly bottom line obligation, what's the relative importance of those two motivations to try to dig into energy efficiency for you?
So we took commitments on being net zero in 2040, which is, I would say, best in class in our industry. And we added some commitments now on 2030, reducing by 45% our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions by 2030. We had hard debates in the company and with our board of directors on, is this ambition enough? Is this not enough? I mean, can we achieve it? Because again, increase of demand, and obviously scope 3 relies on how fast the industry will move to net zero as well. So that's something really that we're working on with all our suppliers, and also explaining to our customers what they should be doing to improve their own carbon emission. 80%, not surprisingly, 80% of our emissions come from scope 3. So that's something on which we work hard. But again, 2022, at least in Europe, given the price of energy, I mean, I'm sure that in the past, at least, I was meeting with a lot of people. Nobody knew how much they were paying for energy consumption. I think in 2022, I've met with many CEOs. First discussion was, how much do you pay? Did you hedge your consumption? Do you know what price you get for 2024? And we've always had a policy about, I mean, securing in advance our electricity consumption. But I think the discussion has moved as well last year to securing and resilience of our energy purchase, because indeed, with the war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of tension on the electricity production in Europe. So that's also a new theme that popped up last year, which maybe we never had in Europe. That's discussion we've had a lot in Africa as well.
Right. Your comment about your CEO clients being aware of energy and measuring it gets to Jean-Pascal's 10 priorities we heard. Among the first 2 that have come out, of course, is measure, verify, and also awareness. Be knowledgeable about the topic. So it sounds like we're moving up that curve. You'll be pleased to hear. Let's turn to you, Peter. You have clients around the world and your customers across industries. What do you think you have in your cupboard of innovations that could help disrupt this game? Because if we're really going to rise to the challenge that Kiske has laid out and the IEA has laid out, to maintain the 2%, but go beyond even to double it towards 5% per annum. I mean, that's a Herculean challenge. Can we do it with just the tools we have in hand, or just deployment, in other words, or do we actually need to think about leapfrogging?
So, first of all, I think we're in a complex environment where we shouldn't wait until something new is coming. The time is now. Action needs to happen now. Technology is available. The issue that we're having is that the climate crisis is like a slowly warming pot of water, where all of a sudden, you feel comfortable and you don't realize that you come into a problem. Now we come to a pivot point with COVID crisis and then also the war, that people realize immediate action is required. And the points that we've worked on yesterday with all the executives and governments, demonstrate that there is a clear understanding that we need to go fast. Technology is there, and it says 10x because we actually need 6x. But as an industrial, we know if we give our target of 6, we may end up at 5. So maybe give a target of 10x in respect to speed. Technology is available to do many of the things. I think Christelle gave great examples of what we discussed yesterday. A data center is, you can say it's a building, or you can say it's an infrastructure, or you can say it's a plant that processes data. One of the things that is on top of the agenda in a data center is, of course, the bill of material, and energy is on top of it. These are very sophisticated buildings, so people put a lot of energy, personal energy, engineering energy in to drive the cost down. Now, if you go into the building industry more general that we discussed yesterday, it's very complex because you have contractors, you have owners, you have builders, you have electricians, you have a big network of people that may have different interests in the supply chain. Now, that's why we've said, let's create awareness. As an engineer, you would always say, I can only improve what I can measure. So how can we put measuring points in there, into the building, into an industrial facility, to show people where they are, how much saving they can get, and in what period of time they have a payback from that perspective. So it's our task to create more and more awareness in buildings, in industrial environment and so forth, how to drive energy efficiency, because it's, from my perspective, the biggest source of clean energy that we can generate and then deploy it in areas that is in desperate need.
This task of measurement, monitoring, verification, and action, there's sort of a virtuous loop there. What are the essential tools? Do we need the Internet of Things, as it's called, to be rolled out? I know industry's already had it for some time. You have a pilot project here in France, I believe the two companies here on stage. But at homes, how real is it? What I know is that experiences with smart meters, for example, people have talked about real-time metering or smart meters for 20 years. Some early experiences were not that successful because it turned out that people weren't motivated by a few pennies of savings, or there's more going on in your life. Nobody wants to be an energy day trader for a small amount of money. The complexity put people off. What have we learned about how behavior works such that we can maybe automate these or use intelligent software to manage this? What's the state of the art on this?
So first of all, I would say it's very important to see that the cost points of a lot of the technologies that we're deploying has rapidly dropped in regards to solar, in regards to heat pump, in regards to every single data point. Christelle talked about it. Whatever you have on your mobile phone, you use the same tools to bring data to the cloud or into an area where you can process it. Sensors become very cheap. They don't need to have a cable connection anymore. And with that, you can deploy the technology. So you put sensors into, for example, there's no reason that in a hotel, for example, every room you can have a sensor. Also in every meeting room you can have a sensor. You know exactly how many people go into the room. With that, we all bring heat into the room. If you have more people in the room, the air condition needs to go stronger. If there is only 2 people in the room, no need to run the air conditioning at the same speed. We know from the outside what kind of solar intensity comes in. We can dim. There is glass available that can automatically dim in that respect. So putting in a sensor is fairly cheap. That's what Jean-Pascal mentioned in the opening this morning. Now, analytics is available, and it is easy to scale because it's in the cloud. So with that, it becomes very feasible. We haven't done a good job at in industry to explain it, also explain it to the right people. That's why it's important that we're bringing industry and government together here so that we're creating, I say incentives. I'm a big fan of incentives, and these can be tax incentives as opposed to saying you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing that. No, here's an incentive to do something. And then people have now seen, and that's the pivot point from our perspective, how expensive energy can be to drive it down.
Let me come back to Keisuke. The ideas that are put on the table here, are these relevant for developing economies? And I know the IEA thinks very carefully and deeply about questions of energy poverty, energy access, the billions that will come online in the next few decades in places like India, Africa, and other parts of the emerging world where energy access cannot be counted on fully yet. Are the kinds of advanced tools we're hearing about just for the rich world? Or what is the application that you see for potentially leapfrogging with smart cities perhaps emerging in the developing world even before they fully blossom in the developed world? And what role should international agencies and governments and cooperation play in making sure that happens?
First of all, I need to point out that even though there is a kind of a developed and developing world, but all the energy systems around the world are actually connected. So when last year the gas supply crisis happened and Europe had to purchase whatever the LNG available, then that led to the enormous, the high prices of global LNG, and that led to those developing countries in particular those South Asia countries. They had to switch back to coal because the natural gas were not available. So in that respect, whatever the kind of the right efforts that the advanced economy would take would bring benefits, substantial benefits to those developing world, which is struggling to maintain the kind of energy access, or there are many for those who don't have even access to energy. So they're in a stage before talking about efficiency. So that's something that we need to point out. But as you rightly point out, there's this kind of leapfrogging the opportunities. So we're now seeing the enormous progress in terms of the distributed energies, cleaner distributed energy sources. So if with the support of those IT technologies, they first can have access. Instead of building the kind of the heavy copper wires and build an enormous big grid before doing that, well, that would be probably necessary as a development progress. But as a kind of initial steps, they have an opportunity to have kind of the access, immediate access to the clean and distributed the electricity power sources. So I think that's something that can bring benefits, enormous benefits to the emerging economies without energy access yet.
We've talked a lot about technology, and we've talked about certainly some policies. I wondered if you could give us a perspective, and I'll ask all my panelists maybe to respond to this, that is finance. This is a crucial obstacle, it seems to me, the IEA has laid out in order to get to the ambitions of net zero and the Paris Accord, that particularly in the emerging world, we're going to have to see a dramatic increase in investment into the clean energy economy, on the order of 4 trillion per annum, a dramatic increase from where we are now. And I spend a lot of time with people in the financial world, and just very recently, a couple of days ago in Washington, I chaired an economist event on the very similar topics to what we're talking about today. And a senior figure from the world's largest asset manager said on my stage that it's very difficult to mobilize capital to invest in clean energy technologies in the developing world. I said, is it because it's private sector? He said, no, we've got a $1 billion fund we've started with international financial institutions willing to do first dollar risk, that is so-called hybrid financing, and it's very hard for us to get projects that we can vet and validate. There's counterparty risk, there's rule of law, there's currency risk. In other words, you went through a list of 12 or 15 challenges, and I see a number of people agreeing with me vigorously from the audience, shaking their heads positively. So in practice, especially as the IEA is also home to the clean energy ministerial process, which wants to encourage this. What can you tell us on the financing front that may be some good news or a provocation on what we need to do better?
Well, of course, we need massive amount of investments in the energy transitions, but also we need to be aware that the vast majority, almost kind of the vast majority of additional energy demand, the energy demand growth, is coming from those emerging economies and developing countries. So in terms of the effectiveness of the various investments and the clean energy transitions, we have to clean up those energy investments in emerging and the developing world. That is quite obvious. But as you point out, there are several kind of hurdles, kind of obstacles to that. And so we point to one of the elements is that the capital costs for those investments in those emerging economies, developing countries, are much higher than the case of the advanced economies. And of course, that's a problem with the financing, but it's not limited to the financing. It's about the kind of a stable the regulatory and the policy environments in those developing countries. And so in that respect, because if the investors can have a kind of the confidence in terms of the money can return with kind of a stable energy policy, the environments and the regulations, then it would be much easier for them to spend money on them. So in that respect, we think that the capacity building with those the emerging economies, developing countries, are a very important part of the IEA, and you pointed to the Clean Energy Ministerial, but we also have the program called the Clean Energy Transitions Program. We thank all those member countries for the kind of a generous support to the programs, but with those additional funding, we've been trying to have capacity building to those developing countries so that they can build and they build in much better and more stable, transparent, predictable the energy policies and the regulations in their systems.
So the investment environment needs to provide that reassurance if we're going to increase the flows of capital. Peter, you obviously deal with many of these countries, particularly now. I mean, we heard from KSK the baseline challenges, but we're now in a high interest rate environment globally that obviously affects the cost of capital, especially in developing countries, and payback rates. How do you answer this when your customers express concern about this?
Of course, the interest rate does play a role into it, but I want to go back to the conference you quoted earlier. I think it's not about the billions. If we're taking Christelle's issue of having a diesel generator that needs to be exchanged to solar, maybe plus a battery, plus a little mini grid in Africa, where if you look at the population growth that we will have, it will come out of Africa, it will come out of India. That's where stuff will need to be built. And if we're attacking this, that doesn't require billions. It requires an easy way of having access to funds to do it without having a PhD to do the application. Now, and the technology is available. Simple solar panels, very simple batteries. You may not even need an inverter because they're just in their small grid. They do everything with direct current that comes straight from the sun. If you will, we build technology. We need to educate and train electricians to be able to do that. So in those villages, they can actually do the work. But they have invested into this diesel generator. So how do we create an incentive to get rid of the diesel generator and put the other technology in on scale, so it is kind of a swarm of money that is required in an easy way. Now, if we move to the first world, go to California, and look at if you want to build a new house there, regulation is in place, you got to put solar on your top. People think about the second EV car that they want to put into the garage, plus a battery, and so forth. So regulatory environment is there, need to put solar on. So the question is it an easy way to lump this into the credit framework of building the house, and you pay it over the period of time, and the savings actually pay for it? That's there. It's much more difficult in Africa or in India to come up with these kind of solutions that we, I think, need.
And maybe to add, because obviously, I mean, at Orange we operate in 18 countries in Africa, and the reality is that very often we bring mobile services in villages before there's energy in those villages. And the reality is that Africa is a continent where it's mobile first, but there's no banking system. Most people don't have a bank account in Africa. And so they use their mobile with mobile payment solution to get credit, buy credit, and so the mobile payment has been vastly adopted in Africa. And we've been testing models providing energy access solution in villages, and the fact that we bring an ability to collect money through the mobile payment provides a framework where then investors are prepared to invest, because the big issue in most of those projects, infrastructure projects, is indeed the counterparty risk and whether or not you're going to be able to get paid ultimately. And I think this is where collaboration between the power and the energy sector and the mobile and the telecom industry is extremely powerful in countries like Africa, where again, there's no banking system as much deployed and adopted than we see in the developed world.
You mentioned collaboration. I know there's a specific example between the power and telecom industry. You have a factory in which you're collaborating, if I'm not mistaken, with Schneider. Can you tell us what is it you're trying to test, or what's the hypothesis you're looking at with this innovative laboratory?
Yeah, I know it because I was on the Schneider side when we did this pilot. But we have many examples where it's about, in that case, it's retesting 5G and stretching the possibilities of 5G connection in an environment of production where you can use video and have real-time access to data much better than you get through Wi-Fi or 4G. So that's a pilot. But again, we're deploying 5G massively in most of our countries, and 5G, and especially will help guarantee for enterprise customers guaranteed bandwidth, secured throughput, which today is not available because mobile networks are not safe enough, not resilient enough, I would say, for very critical use that manufacturing players have or infrastructure players have. So we're piloting. Same is true with the port of Barcelona or the port of Antwerp, where there's massive traffic of ships, trucks, massive data being exchanged, and the need to have high-speed connectivity between mobile, I would say, trucks and obviously ships is needed, but you need a highly secured environment, and that's what 5G brings. So that's what we pilot with Schneider in one factory. That's what we pilot with many, I would say, enterprises.
So thank you, Christelle. You've explained how you've created a fire hose to accelerate the amount of data. But Peter, I'm putting you on the spot. What I know about increasing data flows is that you end up with a data deluge, and sometimes it's hard to make sense of all of it. What is your plan to actually make sense of this vastly higher quantities of data that are going to come? Is it some form of artificial intelligence, or where are we looking into the future on this?
We don't need to look into the future. Technology is available today. That's the great point number one. Also, if we want to go 10x, we discussed it earlier, measure and diagnose, analyze, and then take action. So, people talk about these huge data lakes. I don't think we need those. What we need is structured data, and that's available in industrial sites today. It's available in building. So, we call this contextualized. I mean, the data has information to it. It has a timestamp to it, and there's analytics available that today deployment of AI is normal. in an industrial environment, including a building, for me also is an industrial way of living or doing something. The technology deploys AI already today. We've talked about earlier a client that we have that I visited last week. He's connected all his real estate into one control room where he looks at all the assets in his buildings, be it compression units, be it the HVAC units, be it the power distribution, with thousands and thousands of data points. Some of those locations are remote. Software is available, runs on the cloud, including AI. It tells them how to optimize the air conditioning, how to optimize a grid situation where they also have put in some solar savings in the first year, 29% of the energy bill. So technology is available. We just need to measure, we need to analyze, and then we need to take action.
On that point, I'm glad you went to the building sector because, as was identified yesterday on stage, the building sector is a huge challenge, and it's the retrofits, right? As Jean-Pascal pointed out, it's easy enough. It's hard enough, I should say, but easier to do new buildings to a net zero standard. But the vast building stock, overwhelming building stock that has to be retrofitted is often the challenge. And I'll note this, as anyone that lives in a city as a renter, let's say, there's a misalignment of incentives problem, right? The person who designs the building is not the same as the one who pays for it. It's not the same as the one who leases it. And ultimately, again, if you're a renter in one of the many cities around the world, you don't even have the right, as I don't at my apartment in Manhattan, to have the double or triple glazed windows. I don't control the HVAC. It's centrally controlled, even if they're terrible. And so you have, I would even invest my own money to do it, but I'm not allowed to do it. And so how do you persuade building owners or managers to overcome some of these if they don't win the payback from the investments?
When you look at the large stuff, those are developers. They have meanwhile also understood that their tenants do have that interest, and technology is brought in. What we need to make sure is that it is maintained over time, and that it's not a one-time effort. So every year there needs to be productivity, and we could create incentives that it is measured every year, and productivity is incentivized by tax benefits. Now, if somebody likes the stick, he can also use a tax penalty, if you will. If you go to smaller places where people build something, or you go again, Africa, India, other locations where we need to have very easy to deploy. Cheap is a bad word. Cost-effective, sensor technology applications to be able to show people how they can save money, and that will drive it. Because if it comes out of the pocket and can be done by the owner at the end of the day of the place, or the leasee, that's the way to go.
Can you give us an example of what works, just to illustrate your point?
So, take some of the larger real estate developers with whom we're sitting together. I go back to the US, for example. We'll talk with them, and we figure out how we can, in buildings that are built, in the residential space, how ideally they can put solar panels in, plus charging, plus battery, plus inverter. So it's targeted towards the future, when you also have cars that could actually go bi-directional, and make them include this into the total offer right from the beginning. So when people come, and they don't need to bring their own knowledge to say, this is what I want to have, but they get a complete turnkey offer that's then also built into the rates that they need to pay, and they can actually have a view on what that means for them.
Just in the time remaining, Kiski, I'm going to turn to you, maybe give you the last word on this. We've heard about the role of carrots and to some degree of sticks. What do you see from the IEA perspective when you look across the landscape of policy options and cooperation? What would be the most effective interventions you'd like to see, carrots or sticks, going forward to push energy efficiency to a higher level?
That's actually kind of a rather difficult question because it depends on countries and regions. So the certain policy measures can work to some countries, but may not to the other countries. So I think it's really important that member countries learn from each other. In the
price signals always work, don't they?
Yeah. Or is price signals always work, but we also need to bear in mind that, for instance, the last year, enormously high electricity costs. That was a very strong incentive for kind of energy conservation and reduced spending on the electricity and other energy and natural gas. But at the same time, we need to be careful that it's not only good part, but there are some actually kind of demand destructions. So curtailed the manufacturing industrial activities, which should have happened, but they gave up. And in some cases, they moved the factories to the place with a lot cheaper energy cost. So I think that the price is a very important incentives. Price signal is very important, but the government should mobilize all the other various measures, and that includes the building codes, various energy efficiency standards, so that they can force in a continuous manner, in a kind of a very stable, kind of a long-term perspective, they can promote. So even though the price signal is important, but it's also very important for the government to take whatever measures that can work in terms of the standards or the kind of labeling requirements, and also kind of auditing kind of requirements. All those measures need to be put in place so that they can force the industries to make necessary investments and take the kind of various operational actions for the improving the energy efficiency.
And presumably they should avoid doing harm, because we also saw perverse subsidies, for example, that encouraged greater consumption at a time where at least the price signal might have done its job. Obviously, I think everyone reasonable would support lifeline tariffs for the poor, but that's different from blanket subsidies for the entire economy, let's say. Yeah. And if countries and companies around the world wanted to learn about this and to get smart and learn from best case examples, what's the right way to do it? What's the IEA support on that front?
So our role, we believe, is to support the member countries' governments, share best practices, and also help those non-members in developing world to learn from the various examples of the IEA member countries. And I think that there's so much room for improving their standards. There are many systems. For instance, the air conditioners. So when we look at the air conditioners sold around the world, there's so much kind of a diversity in terms of the efficiency of their performances. So if those countries can adopt, not so the kind of the most advanced, but the kind of middle-sized energy efficiency standards, then it can reduce the energy spending a lot more. So I think that our role is to facilitate those the countries learning from each other, and also give opportunities for the industries to learn for making better investment actions.
And this way, raise the bar, allow that raised ambition to be reached. Well, good. I think that's a good note to finish on. Thank you very much. Please give my panel a wonderful round of applause to thank them. And I turn it back to Monique, our MC.
Thank you so much, Vijay, and thank you to Kesuke, to Christelle, and Peter as well. I also want to say thank you to everyone who is watching on the live stream, so we were able to broadcast this discussion today, and a thank you to Jean-Pascal, who delivered the opening remarks. So there is going to be a short break in the program this morning, about a 15-minute break. For those of you who are interested in continuing the exchange and the dialogue on the 10 priorities for 10X, we will be meeting at 10:15 in the upstairs conference room of the Congress, and we would welcome you to come and join us. With that, we wish you a great rest of the program today. Thank you.